Good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking your time to join us for this learning meetup, where we're going to discuss the Systems Innovation Guide. I'm with my colleague here, Asen. Asen, would you be able to share the screen for me?
Yeah.
Thank you. And Asen is the hub lead and also systems change strategist at RIASA. Our other colleagues are not here with us at the moment. Just for those who have not interacted with us before, the SI Cape Town Hub is a local chapter of the SI network. We are here to learn. We are building a community where we are coming together and learning about systems innovation from theory to practice. And we're also here for connecting to foster a global ecosystem of systems innovators, and also to co-create, because we can't just be talking only, we have to do something. So we are here to co-create and for a systemic impact. Okay, so today we're going to discuss the Systems Innovation Guide. Asen, would you like to tell us a little bit about the guide before we start talking about, before we get into it?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Linda. So we have our Systems Innovation Guide that you can easily access on the SI platform. So here's the link. If you click the link here easily, it will take you to the website directly, but I will drop the link in the chat also. Basically, if you go to the Systems Innovation site, you will be able to see the guides that are there. So the guide is basically designed to give readers a high-level overview of what systems innovation is. That's what we'll be doing tonight, as we will be unpacking the topic of systems innovation. We will start by understanding wicked problems. That's where we're going to start. Why we chose this guide is because there is a strong interest in this subject, and many people nowadays are finding it even difficult, and they find it as abstract when they think of systems innovation or systems change. There are a range of ideas on systems thinking. In the sector where we're working, people are talking about collaboration, they're talking about partnership, they're talking about building network of actors. But sometimes it's also difficult for people to find an entry point when they have to deal with the wicked problems. And this because we are living in an era where, with the rise of globalization, the ongoing expansion of information and technology, the environmental crisis, talking about climate change, the world has changed in a quite radical way. Issues have gone from relatively isolated to highly interconnected and interdependent. And these issues have created another form of challenge that we call wicked problems, and that's what we will be unpacking. But before we get there, maybe it will be good to ask people that are joining us here, what is your understanding of wicked problem? And on here, so you can see from the screen that we are sharing, we can list a few of them. We have financial crisis, climate change, I mentioned already, political paralysis, urban sprawl, water crisis. We had it here in South Africa. Maybe we should think of some other ideas. Yeah, we had it in Cape Town, yeah, but maybe we can throw some ideas of when we think of wicked problems, what comes into our mind?
Yeah, for me, really the thing, I think there are so many, there are different wicked problems, but climate change really sort of hits me hard, because of how complex it is. And when you're thinking of solutions, you start to realize even more problems as you start to think about the solutions. We were talking about a few weeks ago, I attended this event where we're talking about smart mobility in Cape Town. And actually the government of Western Cape is starting a new department in the government called the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And this is the department that is going to be looking into these whole, electric vehicles, move from fossil fuel, to electric vehicles. And thinking of the traffic, I mean, driving from where I live to attend that event in Cape Town, it took me 2 hours, and yet I'm just 50 kilometers away because the traffic is really bad. But here we are having a conversation on innovating, on innovation, and we're talking about an electric vehicle, but we still have the South African economy still working on 90% of fossil fuel. So if we're going to be charging our electric vehicles, then we're going to be using coal to charge the electric vehicles. But at the same time, we're saying we don't want coal. Look here, the coal has been causing us these particular environmental problems that causing biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, and all of those things. We don't want that anymore. But then we don't have it's sort of like, it feels like sort of jumping the gun, if I can put it like that, Yeah. So climate change really has that thing for me because of my experience also in mining and the transition process. What I'm seeing happening, I feel like innovation is being done in parts, not at a systemic level.
Yeah, I like the point that you are mentioning, because you talk about innovation, electric vehicle, and you mentioned the city. We will move there later on, but I just want to touch on the point that you mentioned earlier on. I mean, as you were explaining the issue of climate change, what I'm learning here is already from what you're explaining, multiple perspectives, conflicting opinions on what kind of solution people are bringing to resolve the issue of climate change. People think, people have different opinions. This morning, I was reading another article where someone is actually contradicting the government of South Africa for the steps that they are talking about moving from coal mining to green economy, while as for the same reason that you are giving, Linda, not thinking of the context, how the economy heavily rely on that. And the person went further down to talk about we wanting to copy the Western world, but not thinking of our context. So you see perspectives change, it changes as people think, opinions. But also the issue itself, it's quite multidimensional. There are many factors. As you were giving your example, we saw social, economic, technical, environmental factors. So no fixed solutions really to resolve that. In fact, as you speaking here, I think it will make more sense to actually share this idea that described very well when you are talking about innovation. So the introduction of new electric vehicle to reduce emissions to try and fix the problem. But when you look at it, you understand that the vehicle is just one part. It's one innovation, innovating in part. The vehicle needs to operate in a city, and the city itself is a system. It's another complex systems. You need to think of roads, parking, some of the issues that you just mentioned there, Linda, about traffic itself, the amount of cars that we have. And designers are beginning now to think more that when you design solutions, how do you design solutions that can make people to to use less cars. And that's where we start to think of restructuring. And that's what I like about systems thinking, because as you understand the situation, you do a bit of mapping, you start applying the systems map to know the factors, the elements that exist in the system. Then you start to think of what solution you can design to resolve that issue. And maybe it's not about wiping out the whole thing. Maybe it's about restructuring, moving things around.
Of course.
And yeah, so that goes back to the conversation about wicked problems again, if I can come back here. So what I'm learning and what I've noticed in our experience is our way of seeing things and this of resolving issues is we tend to confuse that when we deal with wicked problems, we're dealing with complexity, and single solution is not always working. I mean, there's this example of just that he was using during the training, that if you have a car that is broken, you can go to the mechanic, they fix it, you know, because they know this is the part that they need to change for the car to move. And that's simple problems. So there's a problem, there is a solution. But when you deal with wicked problems, then you start to think of connections, you think of nodes, you think of power dynamics, you think of relations, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
And in complexity, Asen, you mentioned, when you spoke about complexity, I just thought about the economic system as an example. So basically, when we're talking about simple problems, it's easy to prescribe, you understand, to say, this is what needs to be done. You do that and the problem is solved. But in a complex system now, you can't really prescribe. So there's this concept of emergence, right? So things sort of happen on their own. So the economy for me is quite an interesting example, because we have this free market economy. So to a certain extent, the economy allows for that complexity. But on the other hand, now we do have policies and then certain other events that can happen. So like, for example, right now we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how that has an impact on the global market. But on the other hand, we say it's a free market. So you see the complexity there.
Totally, Linda. And that goes back to what I was saying. If we're dealing with in the energy system, for example, new energy, decarbonized energy system, if I can put it like that, it's not one part, you know? So you have to think of transportation, think of food production, you know, everything that involves energy is combustion fossil fuel. Basically, this requires that everything has to change. But how do you change that? The traditional approach of fixing part, as we were saying, is not resolving the issue. Yeah. And this again, going back to something that I can show again here. So we're talking more on changing things, you know, like the solutions are here is people think more of changing parts. They make solution that comes is mostly on the part, but forgetting the bigger picture. So moving from changing part without changing the underlying systems is the beginning of a whole system innovation or systems change. That's what people should keep in mind as they talk about this, because with systems change, we are not changing part, but we are changing how things are organized. As I was saying earlier on, the organizations between those parts in the system. So it's about the structure. I was just giving an example of the city earlier on to say that it's really about the structure. Maybe it's just a matter of, you know, designing or placing opportunity in such a way that people don't have to drive, they can just walk. Yeah, so.
Yeah. And maybe linking what you just said now, Asen, to the issue of employment and unemployment. So employment is sort of centered in the city center, right? So you have to drive to Cape Town, or you have to go on a bus to Cape Town, or if you're living in Johannesburg, you have to go to the city to go to work, you know. But if there is an opportunity to create more opportunities for employment at local level, then people do not have to travel those long distances to go to work in the first place, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely, Linda. So far, we've been talking about shift from thinking in resolving small problems or focusing on the part to think of the bigger picture, right? And for that to happen, we also talk about reflexive thinking, which is your perception of the world. But it's always good to look at out there to begin to see bigger, right? So if you begin to see bigger, then you can start moving from thinking to understanding how that system works. What are the parts and how those parts interrelate or interconnect with each other. And that's where you begin now the process of mapping them. You do a bit of mapping and try to find places where you can intervene. I mean, if you're bringing solutions, so only when you do a proper mapping, then you can get a sense of making interventions. So system map, and I don't know if we have it here to show, but I don't think I have system map here on the board. But what I like about it is it gives you a holistic view. It helps you also analyze the different structures that exist in the system that you want to intervene. And because you are dealing with various actors, right? You also get shared perspective. You create a kind of, and then through various tools as we apply in systems thinking, then you can even create a shared visual diagram map to help you build a shared understanding. And then from there, then you start to think of what action you take to move. So, and when you get to taking action, then now you start to thinking about systems design, because after you found where the problem, after you get an idea of where to intervene in this system to make the change that we want to do, then you start to think of designing ideas, like designing interventions. If it's a product, Linda, I think this, now I'm talking systemic, like from a micro level, but if you can bring it macro level, but if you can bring it at the micro level, at the lower level, Linda, that's then you understand now the example of the project that we did recently in Langa, where doing proper information gathering to the community, go to the community and establish the different challenges that they feel that they are facing there that need intervention. And then from there, we started designing prototypes around those 5 forecasts that we are looking, like challenge around electricity, access to water, and then design interventions that are quite interrelated. So to me, those, if I can classify that like that, to me, those will be the key dimensions when we talk about, and this goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, systems innovation. So when you do systems innovation, you understand that there are some dimensions that you need to work with in mind. And to me, those are the 4 ones, starting with systems thinking. Once you get a sense of that, you ask questions, because systems thinking is really about, it doesn't necessarily mean having all the answers, but it's about asking the right questions.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and seeing things in a different way. Sorry, I'll come back to you, Linda. Seeing things in a different way, and then now start understanding, doing a kind of mapping of the place where you're working, and then building together and designing together and building. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to bring Onai into the conversation, because there's this other conversation I had with Onai around new ways of organizing, where we were talking about, you just mentioned an example at the micro level. And I think a new way of organizing in our context would be really to work from the micro level, because there's a lot of work that has already been done from the macro level, policy kind of work, all the kind of research that has been done over years is sort of been channeled into policy formulation. But we have a problem now in terms of implementation of those policies. So maybe new ways of organizing, you bring in your systems thinking and then you add the new ways of organizing, and then that's what we're calling systems innovation. So, but at a macro level, there are still also opportunities for systems innovation. Do you, both of you, Onai, Asen, do you have any ideas? What do you think could be those opportunities for systems innovation at a macro level? Of course, we've spoken about the electric vehicle and how we feel that there are still gaps because it's innovating in part, but what kind of opportunities do we think we can see at a macro level for the city of Cape Town, for the government departments to think about systems innovation?
Not sure if Onai
Any
wants to go
ideas?
first.
You're welcome to go first, Asen.
Oh, okay. Look, I think, Linda, that question to me would be nice if you try and put it, you make it a bit specific or you put a bit of context. But I will pick up something, Linda, like when we talk about policies, right? You know how policies have been designed in this country, right? And if we have to think again of the sixth condition of systems change, if you look at how they've been designing policies, to me, it gives a room to innovate a bit. And that's where I feel like systems thinking can play a key role, because if you look at the system itself, right, all the policies that they design at the top level, they are implemented on the ground. But the issues that the policy are being designed to make the change on the ground are, again, complex and interconnected, as we always said. And you will find out that they keep on making these policies, but on the ground, there is no impact. And we still have unrest, we have people going out and so on. They focus more also on numbers, and again, there's this article that I was reading about systems change for evaluation, focus on number, but not making an impact. The way I think systems thinking can be useful for them is to apply it in all the different level of institutions, because the reality, Linda, here, people have been using in the public sector, people are using systems thinking as sense-making tool. If they can shift their way of thinking or perception that they have for systems thinking to really apply it properly, that will give them, possibility to make real change on the ground. Because then, by understanding the system, as we mentioned, that they are working, understand that the intervention that the Department of Social Development is doing is somehow linked to the Department of Rural Development if they want to fight unemployment. So if they get to the point of connecting those and do a proper mapping on the ground to understand these issues, then they will be able to design now policies that are aligned to the context on the ground. And then they can now also, because systems thinking is also about awareness, they can now use that opportunity to start raising awareness. So to me, that's one way to think about policies and how that can be useful. That's just one example. Yeah. Yeah.
Onai.
I'm just looking at the time now and realizing that pretty soon electricity is going to come back, so my computer will shut down. So in that thought, I was like, okay, so what would be the best kind of solution to power outages and things like that? And then I thought about, there are many prospects in solar use. And an example would be something that recharges like a battery, maybe during the day, and have a situation where when we have that 2 hour outage, we power using, or else solar powered street lights during the day, that illuminate at night, things like that. And I just think that could be like a systems innovation that could come up from a problem of power outages. Um, from what I understand about wicked problems, like you talked at length about wicked problems, and I see it as problems that really, to be honest, have no set formula.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like nothing is correct or good or bad and true or false. It's just something that needs to be sort of tried. And because you can't try on one level, you have to sort of make many levels work together to sort of have that complex system running and working to feed another. That's how I understand how wicked problems can be solved. And so I was just thinking about that and having that example. It's for me, it's a whole new way of thinking, which is quite challenging because now you're not solving a hunger problem by just giving food. You're solving a hunger problem by uh, making sure all the systems that contribute to the problem, the symptom of the other problem, and the
Yes.
problem of created by another problem. So that's how complex I have seen systems thinking to be, and systems innovation is the the branches that then form the bigger system. Yeah, that's what I would say as an example.
Yeah. No, I agree with you all night. I agree with you all night. Something that also came to my mind as you were speaking, where we talk about systems innovation now, when we think of new ways of any kind of systems level innovation is going to require some system level awareness. For this, we need a new way of thinking. And so when you get a new way of thinking, then you begin to also start to think a new way of organizing yourself and restructuring. Yeah, and that's yeah.
And I feel like for the new ways of organizing, there's so many people that are at the bottom of the pyramid who have not really been involved in policy making or brought to the table to talk about the solution to the problems that we are facing. Yes, of course, over in the past years, there's a lot of community sort of engagement in projects and many platforms or solutions that they're thinking of. But I think the other challenge there is still about the partnership, the kind of relationship, the value that each of those partners are actually bringing to the table. So, and if I can give an example of mining communities, right? So you realize that people who are living in areas where mining is taking place, they have the challenges of their livelihood, like they do not have any sources of income and all of those things. So now when you start talking about community engagement, you're not bringing them at the same level with a mining company or with the government or with the local government or with the traditional leader, because the values that are being looked at in that space is different. So when you're talking about new ways of organizing, I feel like bringing in the more people who are at the bottom of the pyramid and bringing them with their value. They do not have money, they do not have assets, but they have a value. What's that value? Let's try and find out what that value is and let them bring that to the table as equal partners.
Yeah. Now you're talking nice stuff, Linda, here. And yeah, now you're talking nice stuff, because in that process of building collaboration for change, that's the starting point. So you bring together. In that process, you understand that it's a learning, it's a phase where you get to learn. You need to understand, to borrow your word, what are the drivers that exist there? Because know that there are some models that existed in the past that never been successful because of competing interests. So when you want to bring those kind of partnership, that's when you need to know, bring everybody around the table and ask questions. And this is what I like about systems thinking. It's really about asking questions. What do you want to engage in this kind of partnership? And then you start asking questions around capabilities, like why are we even the right people to talk about this, or the right people to be in this kind of partnership? But there are also issues around culture, Linda, and you know it, especially here in Africa. It's a big challenge, you know, how compatible people are when you bring them, especially organizations, you know, issues of compatibility as organizational culture. You know, are we even the right fit to do the kind of thing that we're doing? And to me, when you start asking these questions, then you start to think of how then you begin to build a value network of people who can make a significant impact or to make some shift in the system. But it doesn't end like that, right? So when you get together, ask those questions, then you need to begin. And this is again the same framework that I was using earlier on when I was speaking about systems change. Then you get to a point now you start to imagine. You start to imagine and to think of what are we proposing, ideas around value proposition. What value will we create together and for whom when we want to do this kind of intervention? And then you start to think of what impact, you know, are we targeting to make a particular impact, and what's that? And what impact are we going to generate here as we come together, and for whom, you know? And so when you have that, you start mapping. That's the right way. You start mapping the value chain, because it's about working together as partner. You start doing your map of value chain. How are we going to deliver this kind of intervention that we're saying we're going to do? How are we going to deliver even our value proposition in this partnership? Here, you really want to establish a detailed model for how the partner will deliver and how they will deliver the value proposition that they have. So and then once you have that, then you get to the point of defining the roles of each partners, and then you think of how we're going to hold it
accountable.
And then what system do we put in place to start measuring our impact? And once you have that, then you start to think of now, how do we now build together and how do we innovate together? So those are some of the things that once you get to build, that's, to me, it's the foundation, a solid foundation toward creating a very valuable network of people who are there to drive a particular change.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the issue of culture, Asen, in my mind, it also came the issue of conflict. You know, like there's so many places where stakeholders are actually in conflict, yet they're supposed to be working together, you know. So, and I think it's important to understand that in systems thinking, one of the things that is quite crucial is having everybody understand. You spoke about reflexive thinking earlier on, to say everybody has their own worldview and how they understand or how they see the world or how they even see the person next to them. But if there's an opportunity to see other perspectives, right, and also understand not only the value that other stakeholders are bringing to the table, but what they also want to get out of the partnership. So if it's communities and they say, you know, for us, really, it's about the livelihood. We want to live our lives. We want to live happy lives here with we want income, and we want a local economy that is thriving. How can, and I'm speaking from a mining perspective here, how can a mining company then work together with the community to build those things, but at the benefit of the mining company at the same time? I don't know if I'm making sense there. So systems thinking helps us to come to those kind of, you know, sort of agreements, if I can put it like that, to say everyone is happy.
Yeah. I agree with you, and that touches on the concept of linear and non-linear, right? Because if you look at the way, talking about the mining example, if you look at the way intervention have been done, I mean, we all know the level of investment that the mining companies. I'm sure you are writing a paper on what's
inclusivity.
Inclusivity in the inclusivity in the mining, taking the example of what is the example that you're taking?
We want to leverage on the social and labor plan to say we have this thing already. It looks really good, and how can we leverage on the existence of this piece of legislation and see how we can improve it so that we include the relevant stakeholders.
Yeah. So the critique that we have about that social labor plan is exactly the inclusivity that you want to address, because the mining company comes on one end, and then they work with the labor committee or whatever you want to call it, but the large number of the community where the intervention is taking place is forgotten. I mean, there's important role players there. I mean, they are besides the
I've actually been in communities where they didn't know that a social and labor plan exists.
Exactly.
You know, for their community. So those are the
kind of awareness is so you see now the point I was trying to make here is those changes. For us to start seeing those changes, we need to shift away from that linear, and this is something that is also featured in this guide that we are discussing, linear and non-linear. We have explored the possibility of creating a regenerative local economy just by engaging various role players and stakeholders at the local level. These are not connected because, like you rightly say, lack of information. Awareness is quite important, bringing the right stakeholders in place. If we really want to make an impact, how do we do things differently? You know, what else can we explore that can offer an opportunity to create a sustainable local economy in a particular area? And you can do that only if you shift your thinking. And the systems thinking is the one that is going to help you shift your thinking so that you can begin to innovate in the system and create change and facilitate change. And that's the systems change.
That sounds like a very good way to close this.
Thank you so much,
like
Linda.
You really sort of summarized everything. Like you put in the guide in a tight pack. You really summarized it really well. So the innovating within the system, that's what we want to aim at. We really need to move away from innovating in parts, because we see how that is actually creating more problems, within the system. So looking at the system from like if I can put it like that, from a holistic point of view, and look at all the interconnected elements, how they are interrelated, and how those relationships are actually playing out. What are the results of those interconnections and interrelations? So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today as we discuss the Systems Innovation Guide. We're going to have our next learning session, learning meetup, Asen, on the 7th of July, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And we'll be sharing information about that on LinkedIn and our SI Cape Town Hub platform. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Okay. Bye.